Hello everyone. Welcome to EUROSTUDENT Talks webinar. I am very happy to see you all here. People are still joining as well, so if someone is coming, then very welcome. I think we are all kind of lucky because second webinar in a row, we have the chance to see and hear very fresh EUROSTUDENT 9 results. Last time we were talking about some results from Sweden and Czech Republic, but today we are turning our eyes to Estonia with a focus on the topic of access to higher education. This time we are doing it a bit different format in that sense that besides the presenters, we have here one discussant who will comment on the results from the student perspective after the presentation. So first of all, I think I will briefly introduce all the speakers and the discussant, and then we can soon move on to talking about the results. So all the speakers who present Estonian EuroStudent results here today work as policy analysts in think tank Praxis in Estonia. Sandra Haugas started the cooperation with Praxis in 2017, and in the same year she began working with EuroStudent by writing a chapter in Estonian survey report in the sixth round of the project. So a long history already. She led Estonian EuroStudent survey both in seventh and eighth round, and is also leading it in its current ninth round. Sandra's main fields of interest are educational inequality and public policy making theories. Our second speaker, Elisabeth Kendrali, has been involved in the EuroStudent project since EuroStudent 7. Besides the social dimension of higher education, she likes to work on topics like migration and minorities in education and explore different ways for deepening the participation of marginalized groups in research. And last but of course not least, Tali Kletter joined the Praxis team in autumn 2024, but her collaboration with the think tank began already 2 years before, first as a co-researcher and then later as an intern. During that time, Tali contributed to the EuroStudent 8 Estonia study by compiling an overview of the main indicators, describing the Estonian student body and to participating in writing the final report. They all have contributed to the work of the EuroStudent International Consortium as well, for example, by providing feedback on short publications in the previous rounds and validating new survey questions when necessary. And as I said, in addition, I'm very happy to welcome here Gert Kaasi-Kaaslav, chairperson of the Federation of Estonian Student Unions. So greetings to you, Gert, as well, and thanks for joining us. Before we move on to the presentation, I would just like to emphasize that if anybody from our listeners have any questions or comments during the presentation, then please write them to the chat. We will come back to them. And if you want to join in the discussion afterwards during the Q&A session, then just raise your hand and let us know that you would like to ask anything or comment. So I think it's all from me for the introduction, and I can hand over to Sandra, Elisabeth, and Tali, and feel free to start with your presentation.
Thank you. So I'm going to share the slides.
Yes, it works.
Is it okay? Okay. So yes. So to begin, we will briefly introduce the main features of Estonian higher education system and also recent policy changes a little. So Estonian higher education system can be described as a combination of autonomous universities and centralized coordination. So for example, our universities can decide what and how to teach, whom to recruit, and also design their own admission policies and support systems for the students. But at the same time, the Ministry of Education and Research sets the strategic goals, also financing principles for the universities and priority fields. And the strong role of public sector is also reflected in high share of public expenditure to tertiary education, which is 85% compared to OECD average of 69%. And one of the reasons for this high level of public funding is that since 2013, full-time studies in Estonian language programs have been tuition-free in Estonia. So turning to recent policy changes, firstly, several restrictions on tuition-free studies were implemented. So studying is still without tuition, but restrictions on, for instance, studying simultaneously in multiple curricula, also re-entering higher education at the same level, and resuming studies after interruption were implemented. The aim of these changes was to use resources more efficiently and thereby expand access to higher education for new students. However, the reform could affect people from more vulnerable backgrounds more because their educational pathways are not linear. So one of the key questions we are addressing today is whether the representation of different student groups has changed after this policy change. Second policy change is about money. So to ease students' financial burden, the maximum student loan amount was increased in 2022. So it was 2,500 euros, and after this change, it became to be 3,000 euros. And also needs-based study allowance was doubled, so the maximum rate of it was increased from 2,020 euros to 440 euros. So additional question that we are addressing today is whether the financial situation of students improved after this change, and also has working alongside studies decreased as a result of reduced financial pressure to cover living expenses. Third policy change that we would like to highlight is the transition to Estonian language education that was implemented since 2024. Although this reform concerns general education, it's also relevant in the higher education context, as schooling in Estonian language may better prepare students with a Russian language background, which is our biggest language minority, to enter Estonian language higher education. But as the reform is being implemented gradually and it is still in its early stages, its impact on higher education is not yet visible. So we are not addressing a specific research question related to this reform today, only these two that I brought out earlier. But now I will give word to Elizabeth, who will talk about the higher education institution policies a little.
Yeah, I'll say a few words about the support that is available at the level of higher education institutions for vulnerable student groups. And we will distinguish between three vulnerable groups in the Estonian context, and we examined how the supports and measures differ depending on the group. So first, starting with socioeconomically disadvantaged students, I think it's important to mention here again that financial support measures for students in Estonia come from the state level, and they begin only after admission to higher education. So we also didn't identify any measures at the institutional level targeted particularly at socioeconomically disadvantaged students. So higher education institutions in Estonia, they don't identify students from low-income backgrounds, and there are no quotas at admission or special outreach programs or anything like that, particularly regarding students' socioeconomic background. Then moving on to students with linguistic minority background, and like Sandra said, and in Estonia, this mainly concerns students from Russian-speaking families who also for the first 9 years of their schooling attended Russian medium schools, which now is starting to change because of the reform. Here, there is more targeted support available from the institutions, but mainly during studies and not at admission, where usually B2 level Estonian is already required to enter higher education. But during studies, some higher education institutions do offer Estonian language support, mainly in the form of free language courses. And we also identified at least one institution where there is special academic language counseling available for students who speak Estonian as a second language. Then the third group, students with disabilities or impairments, like it's more commonly known and used in the EUROSTUDENT framework. Here we see the most support and different measures available at the institutional level, and also in the admission phase at some institutions. For example, some either preferential or compensatory admission routes or treatment for students with disabilities. And also during studies, it's quite common from institutions to offer different accommodations for exams or for assignments, and multiple Estonian higher education institutions, they also have dedicated counseling for students with special needs or disabilities. But where the institutions differ is whether official, mainly medical, proof of an impairment or a special need is required. So what we will look at today is how these institutional level measures, or the lack of them, how it influences access for vulnerable groups, and if there is anything we can deduct based on EUROSTUDENT 9 data.
Okay, and now we will go on with introducing EUROSTUDENT 9 Estonian study results, and after that we will analyze how to interpret, based on these results, the question that we asked.
Yes, thank you, Sandra. So I will take over, and starting with an overview of the student population. So according to EUROSTUDENT 9 data, the average age of Estonian students is 27.6 years. And this indicator has increased gradually but consistently across the EUROSTUDENT survey waves. So in 2016, the average age was 26.3, and now it has almost reached 28 years. There are some under and overrepresented groups in Estonian higher education. First of all, the data shows the differences between linguistic groups. So around 91% of the student body is made up of students who completed basic education in Estonian, while slightly less than 10% completed it in Russian. At the same time, in the general Estonian population, the share of those who have completed basic education in Russian has been around 18 to 21%, which means students with a Russian language educational background are underrepresented in Estonian higher education. Now, on the other hand, students with highly educated parents are overrepresented in higher education. According to last year's rounds data, 62% of students come from families where at least one parent has a higher education, and this is compared to 45% of highly educated individuals in the general Estonian population. So while over half of the students come from highly educated families, this means that the rest of them, just under 39%, are first generation students, meaning that their parents don't have higher education. Students with special needs are also overrepresented in Estonian higher education. EUROSTUDENT 9 data shows that 27% of students have a special need or a long-term health problem that makes them feel limited in their daily lives, and that is compared to 14% in the general Estonian population. And these under and overrepresentation patterns in these three groups were also identified in EUROSTUDENT 8 Estonian study and even in earlier rounds, which suggests that inequalities in access and representation patterns have remained relatively stable over time. Now, EuroStudent survey does not include data on actual student dropouts, but respondents are asked to indicate the extent to which they agree with the statement that they are seriously considering dropping out of their studies altogether. And according to data from EUROSTUDENT 9, of all Estonian students, 4% have serious intentions to drop out. But when we look at this intention across different student groups, we can see that there are more students than average with serious intentions to drop out among vulnerable groups. And these groups have remained the same compared to the previous EUROSTUDENT 8 survey round. So serious intentions to drop out are more common among students who completed basic education in Russian, also among first-generation students and among students with special needs. But moving on to the topic of employment among students, EUROSTUDENT 9 data shows that around 62% of Estonian students work during the semester alongside their studies, and that is either during the whole semester or from time to time. And the data also shows that a larger share of students work more than 20 hours per week than those working up to 20 hours. The shares are accordingly 36% and 26%. So this indicates that student employment is actually often quite time intensive. And although student employment remains very common with over half of the students working during the semester, the proportion of working students has actually declined in recent years after a long period of growth. So when we look at data from previous EUROSTUDENT survey waves, we can see that the share of working students increased from 66% in 2016 to 70% in 2022, but now the latest data shows a decrease to 62%. The two most common reasons students work are to cover living expenses and to afford things they otherwise could not afford. Both of those reasons were mentioned by 81% of working students. And these were also the main reasons identified in the previous EUROSTUDENT 8 survey wave, although the proportions have increased slightly over time. Financial pressure is also visible in other areas. So compared to EUROSTUDENT 8, there has also been a small increase in students working to support others financially. But the most notable change compared to the survey wave 3 years ago is actually in study-related financial pressure. So the share of students who work because they would otherwise not be able to afford higher education has increased substantially from 43% to 51%. And overall, these shares and changes over time suggest that students are increasingly working out of financial necessity.
Okay, so income and expenses. So when we look at the students' income sources, we can see that employment is still the main source of students' income, accounting for 64% of students' income, and it's similar to the previous round's result, which was 65%. The share of students receiving needs-based study allowance has increased from 22 to 26% compared to the last round's result. But at the same time, the share of students taking out the student loan has increased only marginally from 3 to 4%. We can see from the data that a student's financial situation has become severely more difficult as students' average monthly expenses have increased almost twice as fast as their average monthly income, which has increased only 12%. And for the context, we can see that average wages in Estonia in generally have risen by 28%, and the consumer price index has increased by 20%. And finally, the data also shows that the share of students who perceive serious or very serious financial difficulties has also increased from 22% in 2022 to 24% in 2025.
Yeah, then moving on to students with impairments, EUROSTUDENT 9 results show that 37% of Estonian students reported an impairment or a long-standing health problem. And on the graph here, you can see the most common types of impairments reported, and it shows that the majority of students with impairments are students with mental health problems. So that is the most common limitation among Estonian students. And what's interesting and important is the share of students with mental health problems that has also increased considerably in the past 9 years. So in 2016, we had 3% of students reporting mental health problems, and now in 2025, it's 21%. So it's almost, it's a sevenfold increase. When we looked into different types of mental health problems, so inside this group, this 21% who report mental health problems, we noticed that the rates of anxiety and depression have actually decreased a bit in EUROSTUDENT 9 compared to EUROSTUDENT 8. But ADHD is something that needs attention because among students with mental health problems that limit them in studies, the share of students with ADHD has doubled. In 2022, in EUROSTUDENT 8, we had 22%, and now in 2025, EUROSTUDENT 9 data, it's 44% of students with mental health problems limiting in studies who reported ADHD. So just to emphasize, this 44% is not the rate among all Estonian students, but it's 44% of students with mental health problems that limit in their studies. So it's the increase from 22 to 44 that we want to highlight here, actually. In EUROSTUDENT 9, students who have an impairment that limits in their studies were also asked if they receive sufficient public and institutional support to overcome their limitations. And on average, approximately 1 in 4 students rates the support as sufficient. So the majority of them actually don't receive adequate support. And on this graph, we have visualized differences in the share of students who rate the support as sufficient based on background characteristics. And what's worth emphasizing here is that where we have the lowest shares of satisfied students or students satisfied with support, it's the youngest age group where only 12% receive sufficient support, and also students at non-universities. So in the Estonian context, this is applied higher education institutions, where only 15% receive sufficient support. And now I think we can move on to some conclusions.
Yes. Now we will try to answer to the questions that we posed. So the first question, Tali, maybe you would like to reply.
Yeah. So the first question was, has the representation of different student groups changed in Estonian higher education? And overall, what we saw from the results is that the representation of different student groups has remained relatively stable across recent EuroStudent surveys, and there are persistent patterns of under and overrepresentation. So students with a Russian language educational background continue to be underrepresented, while students from highly educated families remain overrepresented. And similarly, those vulnerable groups, such as first-generation students or students with special needs, continue to show higher intentions to drop out. However, one notable difference or change over time is the gradual increase in average age of students, which shows a growing presence of older students in Estonian higher education. And so overall, from the perspective of the policy changes made to tuition-free study, EuroStudent data does not yet clearly indicate major changes in the representation of student groups, but the continuing increase of the average age of students does suggest that older and potentially students with a more non-linear learning pathway are still participating in higher education.
So the second question, has the financial situation of students improved, and has working alongside studies decreased? As we discussed, one of the main policy changes in recent years was the increase in the maximum student loan amount and the doubling of the needs-based study allowance. But in light of these changes, we can see that students' financial situation has not improved, as already explained. On the contrary, it has become more difficult. So EUROSTUDENT results therefore suggest that these policy changes have not been sufficient. Neither the student loan nor the allowance fully covers students' living expenses, and moreover, both actually remain inaccessible to many students in need. It should be noted that a broader student loan reform is currently being prepared to improve the accessibility of student loans by, for instance, lowering the interest rates, extending the repayment period, and removing the requirement for a private guarantor. And additionally, the maximum loan amount was actually doubled last year, so now it is 6,000 euros. And we can conclude that these measures may alleviate students' financial difficulties to some extent, but are unlikely to resolve them completely. Regarding employment burden, we can see that students indeed work less alongside their studies. As Dali explained, 62% of students compared to the last around 70%. But it's unlikely to reflect an improvement in students' financial situation resulting from recent policy changes, because the share of students receiving needs-based study allowance and/or student loans has increased only marginally. Moreover, the increases in loans and allowances remain actually insufficient to cover living expenses at the level that would substantially reduce the need for students to work. So the decline in students' employment may instead reflect a more difficult labor market situation now.
Yeah, then moving on to the third set of questions about access for vulnerable groups. So how do the measures that we identified, how do they influence access for vulnerable groups? Are students with impairments adequately represented? And is the support for students with impairments sufficient? Like we showed earlier, students with Russian language background continue to be underrepresented in higher education. So there is some evidence that the measure institutions are using right now to support linguistic minorities might not be sufficient. And also when we consider the above average dropout intentions, then this really points to the fact that the support available during studies might also be insufficient. At the same time, when we look at students with impairments, we did identify more targeted measures, particularly for students with impairments at the higher education institutions level, and also both at admission and throughout studies. And this effect of more attention to this group's access and well-being was somewhat noticeable also in EUROSTUDENT 9 data, because unlike other vulnerable groups, students with impairments are actually persistently overrepresented in Estonian higher education. But regarding the final question, if the support for students with impairments is sufficient, I would say that it doesn't mean that these institutional level measures at admission and during studies are sufficient, because EUROSTUDENT 9 data rather points to the opposite situation, because we only had 1 in 4 students with an impairment who are satisfied with the support they receive, either from the state or the institutional level, to overcome their limitations. And it was especially the younger students who often reported lacking support.
So to conclude, is Estonian higher education system widening access or widening gaps? Based on EUROSTUDENT results, we cannot clearly conclude either, but instead the current policy framework appears to actually reproduce existing inequalities, which highlights the need for a more comprehensive approach to ensuring equal access to higher education. This is all from us. So questions, thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for all the insights you gave us about Estonia and its EUROSTUDENT 9 selected findings. Before I open questions for our listeners, I would like to hear what student representatives actually think about those results and how do they see the situation. So Kärt Kaasik-Kaaslav from Estonian Federal of Student Unions, maybe you can reflect on the presentation from your perspective first.
Yes, thank you. We're always so excited to have new Euro student studies drop. Means our policy work is going to be really strong for the next years. And from a student representative perspective, the most pressing of these issues is the financial situation of students. Quite a few points of data overall are very concerning, but especially the financial pressure that students experience. And yeah, there are improvements in student loans happening right now. The second reading of the new law was in Parliament yesterday, and it always gets really wide approval. And also, it has shown us that policymakers are also in agreement that studies should be the first priority for students not working, but whatever the allowances for students or loans are, they are not enough at this moment. One point of data that I would think would be really interesting to see next to the amount of students working would probably also be like how many of them do their work in actually the area that they're studying for, because if you need to work, then you can still also work in something you can use for experience. So that's something I would maybe kick off as maybe the first question, if you guys can answer. But yeah, that's the brief reflection.
Yeah, Sandra, Elizabeth, Tali, maybe you can maybe answer how many are working on the area that they're studying, but if you don't know it at the moment, that's fine as well. But if you can comment.
Then maybe Tali, you can remember.
Yes, if I remember correctly, I will have to go check from the report again, but I think it was 57% of students altogether work in an area that is connected to their studies. So actually over half of the students. And in the report, you can see also more across groups. So I think it was older students who work more in an area that is connected to their work, which is also expected. And also some other groups, which I don't remember right now by heart. But yeah, we have looked at it.
Maybe one question to Kärt from me, that we saw that students with impairments are overrepresented, but at the same time they see that the support that they can receive is not always satisfying. Is this something that you as student representatives are somehow also paying attention to and working on, or maybe you can comment on that side as well?
Yes, actually, my vice chairperson was also supposed to be here right now, but she's in the ministry talking about impaired students. So that's just a fact on the side. But yeah, it is something we pay close attention to right now. And I think also is that it really varies between the higher education institutions. So that's that.
So the situation is, in that sense, a bit different and not always balanced when we look at the whole landscape of higher education institutions. But opening questions, floor for the questions and comments, anybody from our listeners. Either questions to Sandra, Elizabeth, Tali, or maybe to Kärt about the representation and advocacy work that they're doing. Yes, Mia Malin Hansen from European Commission, please.
Thank you. And thank you, first of all, for a really interesting presentation. And this is particularly interesting because we are for me, because we're at the European Commission working on this very agenda on widening access to higher education. I've got a few questions. One was, maybe I wasn't paying close enough attention, probably, was when were the reforms of the student financing carried out? Also, to get an idea of how long it's been since it was implemented. That was more of an question of understanding. Then I've got a question regarding what patterns you see in overlap in the different groups with the language and financial situation. Yeah, what overlaps do you see? Are these totally different groups, or are there students who are present in a lot of the different type of issues or barriers that they face? And lastly, and that's maybe more of a cheeky question, I think, you're recommending a more comprehensive approach to improving the access to higher education. Is there anything more specific you can point to? And I think maybe that's also a question for Kat. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mia. So, Sandra, Elizabeth, Ali, probably you can start from the first question.
Yeah, thank you for the questions and your feedback. I can start with these reforms. So they were 2022 and 2023 regarding these changes that I introduced, raising the needs-based study allowance and study loan maximum amounts. But as also said, our ministry is currently preparing for a more comprehensive study loan reform. And yeah, maybe Kat knows regarding this recent developments, but I think it should be implemented next year. Is it like that?
It should be going through the last reading in the Parliament in June, and then probably next study year it should be implemented. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but the maximum amount of study loan was actually again increased last year, 2025. So, and this was more substantial increase. It was doubled at that time, because this 2023 increase, this was really a marginal, from 2,500 to 3,000. So it was not so big. So yeah, these changes were not carried out a long time ago, so just a couple of years. But regarding your second question, overlap, yeah, I think we saw in several results, we saw that these vulnerable groups do overlap. So students with impairments or first generation students. So in different aspects, these groups were highlighted with their worse situation. I don't know, maybe someone else would like to add some examples.
Yeah, I actually just checked again that when you look at our students who report financial difficulties, then the share of students who report financial difficulties, it is the highest among students with impairments and students with a Russian language background. So they do totally overlap in many aspects, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And you also had third question.
It was about this comprehensive approach.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So our idea is that we have seen that we have ministries increasing study allowance at one time spot, and second year they are increasing study loan. So these are not looked together and designed comprehensively. They're doing one thing and other thing, but this should be looked together, and also not just these amounts, monetary amounts, but also conditions, who qualifies on them, or on what conditions, and so on. And additionally, I would say that the measures should start even earlier. So in the secondary level of general education, actually. So for instance, regarding career counseling to provide access to more students, not just these privileged ones. So yeah, in that sense, more comprehensive.
Or also maybe just to highlight that by the more comprehensive, we lack a strategy, I think is the key message here also.
National strategy, yeah.
Yeah. Or concrete measurable goals even for which your student data could be used nicely.
Yes, and since I was asked also this third question, something that we've noticed is that the numbers stay the same for tens of years until we get so tired that we take it to the streets and then it's raised. And that's what the numbers correlate to, because we did celebrate the 10th birthday of the study allowance is not raising, and then it finally raised a bit. But we would also like to see it like indexed in some way, or something also to look at in like the second level of studies, higher education, and such is the regional accessibility, because we do see that it is harder to get access to higher education if you are from somewhere, some smaller area, for example, and the local governments could help with support to get their students educated and then also bring them back to their home areas.
Yeah, and actually, some thoughts came to my mind as well, as I am based in Estonia as well and working in the field of education policy analysis. That, as Sandra said, it's not only about the amounts of money that we are allowing, because this maximum student loan is something that has been increased, but as far as I have heard also, when just looking at the media or from friends, relatives, whatever, I think this private guarantor is always the question that that is somehow risky, and people see it as something that they don't want to take up maybe. And the other side is that we know that in UK you don't always have to pay back the study loan, depending on what are you going to do as your job, and how big will be your salary. But in Estonia, it is not that kind of system. So it's like kind of background information that I'm emphasizing, that the system is different, and you anyway have to pay it back. It hasn't been guaranteed anyhow by the state in that sense, but you have had to have this private guarantor, and you have to pay back whatever you're doing after the studies. Yeah, that was maybe one comment from my side as well.
Yeah,
But any other...
the current reform focuses on this question as well. I think it's
Yeah.
very important. So we can see that it's moving towards right direction, but still it's probably not sufficient, because we have to also focus on the allowances and other measures mentioned.
So we can see in EUROSTUDENT 10 or 11 what has been the impact actually after the study loan reform. And also, for example, I think in Finland, of course, now they have many budget cuts as well, but they have those support measures for students that you can apply for support if you want to have like a place for living. You can get some amount of the money or the costs covered. But in Estonia, basically, this is this needs-based study allowance, but we don't have, in addition to health insurance, basically anything that you automatically get because you are a student. It's more like applying for different support measures. So just giving context for me. But yes, Aune, please, your comment or question.
Yeah, thank you first for the overview. That is very familiar for me, coming from Estonia, University of Tartu. I wanted to ask a question about the students with impairments. The share of these students have increased in such a radical pace that it's incredible. did you analyze any data from the other countries or internationally? Is it the same pattern in all countries? And is the satisfaction with support that is, or dissatisfaction with support comparable to the situation in other countries, or is it particularly Estonian? And can you say anything about the expectations? What kind of support students would expect the students with impairments? I mean, or is it just, I mean, one fourth are satisfied and the 3/4 are not? Is it just what would they want? More money, more counseling, more kind of differentiation in studies? What they're lacking most?
Thank you. I wanted to first answer the question about international comparison. So this we don't have yet, because there are some EUROSTUDENT 9 countries who, am I right, that are still actually collecting their data. So this we can only expect to receive maybe next year around the same time when we can make this.
Yes, in June 2027 will be the final conference. So it means that at the moment, countries are still sending their data to the international database and so on. So this is still work in progress. But it means that we have something to look after and look forward to.
But I would be, maybe somebody can comment from your countries if you have seen similar patterns in the share of students with impairments. Then the question that do we know what kind of support they would need or what they lack the most? Based on EUROSTUDENT 9, we don't know, but we have some data from EUROSTUDENT 8 about this, where we examine more specifically if students know about financial counseling at their institution, about psychological counseling or other types of counseling. But I can't give you the results from the top of my head. So there is some data about this too, actually, if you're interested.
Yeah, but the question was that if they have heard these kinds of counseling, not what do they actually need. This was not there.
But we could derive some things that if there are types of counseling the students are not even aware of or nobody is using, then I think this can give some guidance to institutions.
Yeah, maybe indirectly, yeah.
Any other questions, comments? I think I have one question to all of you, including Gert, because Gert said that student unions are always looking forward to EUROSTUDENT data. So you are all familiar with the survey. You have been working with those results during previous rounds and now, so you know it, and you have history in this regard with the survey. So question to all of you, did anything surprise you this time when it comes to the results? And is there anything EUROSTUDENT survey should ask in addition or in a different way so that we could get data that would be somehow even more beneficial for policymaking and evidence-based decisions?
I can start maybe. For me, this decrease in working in employment was a bit surprising because this has always increased among Estonian students since at least EUROSTUDENT 6, from where I started to work with EUROSTUDENT data. And now in the current round, it decreased a little. So this was definitely surprising for me.
Mm-hmm. Any other reflections?
Well, to be honest, not too much was surprising. It rather confirmed some hunches that we already had or that the patterns that we knew from earlier. But maybe something was about the rate of students who report ADHD, that is also not surprising, but considering that ADHD has received a lot of attention in the public discourse in Estonia as well. So what is surprising about it is that it's so clearly reflected in students' experiences and the EUROSTUDENT 9 data too.
But if nothing is not too surprising. So maybe some ideas. Should we ask something in a different way, something in addition? Maybe Gert can also say, do you feel that we are lacking any data that could be useful for your advocacy work maybe as well? Or
I just saw the EUROSTUDENT 9 final overview this morning as it was uploaded to the website as well. So I haven't really had that much time to delve deep into it. But so as much as we have seen, it's the same as previous speakers have said, that confirms a lot of hunches. But also for us, it was extremely interesting to see that the amount of students that are working has went down, but that's probably a thing to do with the job market as well, which is going to be an interesting thing to look at for future Euro students or question-wise, what we are missing, I can't really say, but something I did forget to mention or didn't mention before, but I feel is worth mentioning is that right now we are facing a very rare demographic bump in our youth. So in the next one, maybe there will be more students that are younger because the amount of young people that are entering higher education is possibly increasing. And that's going to be interesting to see and whether our support systems can handle them.
definitely.
Yeah, and
Yes.
how this will affect the access, and if we will see maybe access narrowing down because of more competition to places in case, the study places are not increased.
Yeah, we'll see how the situation will develop in this regard.
But yeah, to reflect on if something should be changed or added regarding what data we are collecting through EuroStudent based on the Estonian case. I think in Estonia, we feel that there is already a lot of usable, actionable data. And for us as researchers, the question is more about how and who should make this data usable for other researchers and different higher education stakeholders in Estonia. So we rather feel sometimes a bit sorry that not all the data reaches all higher education institutions or other stakeholders, because it's also limited what we as country researchers can do or present the analysis.
Indeed. Any other final questions, comments? Yes, Aune, please.
If I may, another one, then maybe it's also it's a question to you, but it's also the proposal maybe to the future research is about the question of who are the sort of vulnerable groups. So you are touching the groups with parents without higher education, with linguistic background, and with impairments. And somebody in the discussion mentioned also the students coming outside of big cities. So I think the regional inequality is really sort of touched, and the only good way I think in Estonia, but maybe it's totally different in other countries, is about asking where the students have graduated from the basic school, because for the secondary education, some students also come to the cities already. So anyway, it's, I think for the future research, maybe to consider is what are the national, in different countries, sort of national sources for vulnerability that may be totally different in different countries. And I think the regional issue is undercovered in Estonia. And we often speak about the parents' higher education background, maybe, but that's maybe not so crucial even in Estonia than the regional aspect.
Mm-hmm. Some country-specific questions or this varied survey questionnaire that you can maybe add. But yes, does anybody from the research team wants to comment, elaborate on that?
A very good point for the Estonian questionnaire in the future.
Yeah, I agree. And I think we can already do that, so we don't have to add any questions. It's doable already. So yeah.
Yeah, it's very long already. So it's the question that do we ask right questions and how to keep it as compact as possible with that long survey. But anyways, I could wrap it up already, so it's the last chance if anybody has any other questions or comments. Doesn't seem so. So the presentation, the slideshow, and the recording will be available soon at EUROSTUDENT webpage, as usually. So if anybody wants to rewatch or share it in their own networks, then it's very welcome. Thank you all, Sandra, Elizabeth, Dari, and of course, thanks to Gert that you joined us today and commented from the student union's perspective. Thanks to all our listeners for the comments, questions, and for being here with us. You can already save the date for the next EUROSTUDENT Talks. It will be 18th of June, and then we will present some sneak peek findings about a short report on student income. So more information will follow soon, and so far, stay tuned and see you in June. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Have a
you.
nice day.
Bye.